Hey, what's up guys? So today I'm going to be talking about Ittle Dew, or at least Ittle Dew 1, that is going to be on Nintendo Switch by the time this video releases. But right now I was able to get a review copy from Ludosity and be able to play the game early, a little bit ahead of time, so I can give you guys my 2 cents on the game. So like I said, I want to make it as clear as possible. Ludosity, the developers of this game, did in fact supply me with a review code, so that's out there now. But what is Ittle Dew? Well, Ittle Dew was kind of this 2D adventure slash like puzzle game. It originally came out on like the Wii U. I think it also came out on like PC, iOS, Android. It even came out on the Ouya, which is kind of interesting because no one really talks about the Ouya these days. I guess after putting it on Wii U, Ludosity decided to port the first Ittle Dew game onto the Switch, which is I think a good idea, considering that a lot of the other platforms there, the only one that really I guess is still a good platform that people really play games on is the PC. So putting it on Switch was a good idea. And Ittle Dew 2, which actually, funny enough, was actually the first game I ever actually reviewed on this channel, was a pretty good game. So I was excited to really get my hands on the first game and see how I feel about it. Now, in general, what is Ittle Dew? It's kind of like this Zelda-inspired game. You can kind of see a lot of inspiration from Zelda, specifically Zelda games like Link's Awakening or Link to the Past in this game. It kind of has only two characters really that are important to the game, being Ittle and Tipsy. Tipsy is kind of like this Navi-like character. He's just kind of there to give you advice when you need it. Ittle is the main character, kind of like the Link of the game. And there's also like this one little shopkeeper named Eaton or Iton. I'm not really sure how you're supposed to say his name. But the whole story of Ittle Dew is basically just that the main character, Ittle, just wants to go on an adventure. And they happen to be kind of like floating on this raft, and they just kind of show up at this unknown, uncharted island. Where Eaton has his shop set up. In this shop, he tells them that, yeah, I'll give you a raft, so you could find an island for a better adventure, and all he really wants is this treasure that's in this big castle that's featured on the island. So Ittle and Tipsy kind of agree to that man's terms, and they go into it. Now, one thing I do want to make it clear is that Ittle Dew is very different from Zelda in terms of how it handles like its story elements and kind of like how it handles like the humor and whatnot. Because Zelda is very serious for the most part. Like, yes, it has some very weird things, and there is some level of humor in Zelda, but the difference with Ittle Dew is that it feels more like you're playing a game where the world is basically the same world as Adventure Time. It's very silly, very kid-like in terms of its humor. There was a scene where the main character had her tongue stuck on this this ice pole, like this magical ice staff, basically, or ice rod, I should say. And it kind of keeps going on like that. Like, there's a lot of little jokes that it just shows how much of a child the main character is. And I actually really like that. I feel like it's a nice, different take on that formula. It's a very good game. There's like maybe a few little things here and there that I feel like they could have, expanded upon or make a little bit better. For instance, one criticism I have to give the game is that the combat is kind of like bare bones. I guess they were going for the classic Zelda like fighting, but the enemies don't really give you a lot of reason why you would have to treat it a little differently. A lot of Zelda games typically have enemies that, yeah, sure, you have to whack them with the stick, but sometimes some of them are weak to the fire rod or the ice rod, or maybe they require you to attack in a certain way. Ittle Dew has a little bit of that, but not enough for me to feel like the combat is that deep. It could have been a lot better in my opinion. But again, they do have some level of that. Like, there are some enemies that you can freeze, and there's one enemy type that immediately comes to mind where you have to kind of like walk around them and hit them from behind in order to actually do damage to them. Otherwise, they will just block your attack. But other than those characters, for the most part, you can hit them any way you feel like, and there's very little difference in like how they act. So you'll have like, enemies who shoot some kind of projectile, and an enemy who just basically walks into you. And maybe there's an enemy type that I'm unaware of, but that seems to be mostly the general idea. That's like 90% of the enemies of the game. There doesn't seem to be too much variety in terms of how the enemies act and that sort of thing. The only enemy that I can think of that acts drastically different from the two that I just described is this one like phantom like enemy, ghost like enemy that is an instant kill thing, but it takes super long for it to actually catch you. But once it catches you, it's basically like an instant death like thing. It's kind of like the wall masters, the big hands in Zelda, where like they would once it grabbed you, that's it, it's over. But the difference with those guys is that they will take you back to the beginning of the dungeon. Ittle Dew's phantom-like enemy doesn't really do that. It's more of just like it just kills you. And another criticism I can give Ludosity as well, in terms of Ittle Dew, is that once you die in the game, death basically means nothing. Because all dying does, it just makes you begin at the room that you died in. So you can kind of just throw yourself at enemies non-stop until you just win. And that kind of defeats the purpose of the combat in a way. It kind of just trivializes it. So those are like kind of like my major gripes with the game. I feel like the combat is just not very deep. And the enemy variety in terms of how they act is just not there. But you know, there are a lot of other things you can do in the game. Like the exploration is pretty cool. The map is not as big as the second Ittle Dew game, but I guess that's kind of okay considering this is the first foray into a game like this. But the map does have like its secrets. There's like these cards you can collect that you could find in different dungeons throughout the game, and each dungeon, you know, utilizes the items that you find throughout the game. And I could be wrong on this, but I'm pretty sure you can get the items in like pretty much any order you want. Like I don't remember there being like a set path. There might be a set path, and maybe it's just done well enough that it's not noticeable, but it didn't feel like I was forced into a certain pathway. And you know, just like you know, classic Zelda fashion, which again, you're gonna hear me say Zelda a lot because this game is clearly very inspired by that, and in a good way. It's not a ripoff by any means. I want to make that clear. This is not a ripoff. It's just very inspired, and it's a very good attempt at that. It's probably one of the better Zelda-like games. You have like the health works similar way with hearts. You know, enemies will drop hearts. I think hearts are like legit like the only thing that enemies can really drop, unless there's something I missed. I think that's like the only thing they can drop. And you know, hearts heal you, of course. And then you can collect paper, which is basically your pieces of heart. Cards, which is just kind of like collectibles. You can collect maps just like you would in a Zelda game. Coins, which you can use to buy items from Eton, the guy I mentioned earlier. And the difference of coins is it's not exactly the same as rupees. I want to make that clear, because rupees you can just get whenever, you can get it wherever, and you can just buy anything you want. Coins is a little bit different, because coins, they give you a set amount of coins in certain rooms, and those coins almost act like keys, where once you get enough coins, then you could buy the important key item that you need to get in order to progress through the castle. So it's not really the same thing as rupees. The way it's utilized is a little bit differently, but it's essentially like, you know, their currency system. There are 3 items in the game, so it doesn't really, you know, there's not like 8 items or 9, 10 items like a Zelda game would have. It's only 3, and each item is like mapped to a certain button. So you have like Y, X, B, and A. Just one item in particular uses two of those buttons, and you know, they do like kind of open up a bit of puzzle potential. Like, you know, there's a good amount of puzzles that utilize them very well. I think my favorite of the 3 items is the portal wand, because that's the one that uses 2 buttons, and it just seems like there's more interesting mechanics behind that wand. The other one is just a fire sword and ice wand, and they don't really they're not as interesting in terms of like items. Like, you kind of, that just seems like very par for the course, I suppose. It's a very self-aware game. It makes fun of itself while also making fun of like the tropes, I suppose. And it's a light-hearted game that I think is just really well made. I've played a good amount of like Zelda inspired games, especially in between Zelda games where, you know, I'm still waiting on these games. And with Link's Awakening coming out very soon and has that very similar style that Ittle Dew also has, I'm kind of just like in that mood, and I'm ready to play more. One thing I can say in Ittle Dew's favor is that Ittle Dew has like, it kind of supports speedrunners. because they have an option I noticed where you can have a timer in the bottom. You may notice that most of the gameplay you've seen in this video has that timer on the bottom at all times. So if you're someone who enjoys speed running, very short and like small Zelda-like game like this with a timer on the bottom can pretty much be, I don't know, a speedrunner's safe haven almost. Like, it just seems like the kind of game that would be really speedrunner friendly. So that seems kind of cool. I like that. I'm not really a speedrunner myself, but I like the option being there. So I guess that's pretty much all I feel about in terms of Ittle Dew 1 on the Switch. That is what I'm playing it on, of course. So I guess I'll give you guys my overall reception of the game. And basically, the way I look at Ittle Dew 1, it is a bite-sized diet Zelda. Now, is that bad? No. When I say that, all I'm saying is that this is a Zelda game, basically, but with a much smaller scale than Zelda, and obviously not taking itself as seriously, which I think personally is great. I think that's fantastic, and not to mention that this game is only $10. So as far as I'm concerned, this game is worth the money if you're looking for a very quick and short Zelda-like experience. And I say, like, if you're someone who's looking for something like that, maybe you want a short Zelda experience to hold you over till Link's Awakening next month, I say definitely go for Ittle Dew. And hell, if you like the first Ittle Dew game, maybe try out Ittle Dew 2. I also have a review of that on the channel, so feel free to check that out as well if you want. And all I really have to say is that Ludosity has been doing really great work. I enjoy both Ittle Dew games, it seems. I also am a big fan of Slap City, which is their platformer fighter game, which, by the way, Ittle Dew is actually fully featured on Slap City. So I guess you could just say, like, I guess I'm a fan of Ludosity. So if Ludosity's watching this, then please do more what you're doing. It's obviously, like, very fun. I'm very into what you guys have been making thus far. But like I said, there has been some things that I think Ittle Dew 1 isn't doing as well as it could have done. So I'll just leave it at that. I'm not gonna give this game like a definite score, I guess, but that's basically all I have for you guys today. Let me know how you guys feel about Ittle Dew. Let me know if you have any interest in this game, or maybe you don't have that much interest, but that's basically all I have for you guys. So until then, I'll see you guys in the next one.